Hey everybody, this is the preface and the first chapter, which is also the introduction to the making of Marx's Critical Theory by Alan Oakley. This is part of me just reading through a bunch of the introductory sections of books on Marx's Capital, based upon the Bibliography and Jan Hoff's Marx Worldwide. The table of contents are 1. Chapter 1, Introduction, Marx's Critico-Theoretical Writings, Structures, and Issues. Chapter 2, it says before 18... I think there's some typos on this thing because it says before 1884, the early critique of philosophy and society, but I think it's supposed to be 1844. Before 1844, the early critique of philosophy and society, school and university, journalism, critique of political philosophy. Chapter 3, 1844 to 1856, the criticism of capitalism and the formulation of historical materialism. Paris, political economy and critique of capitalism. Brussels, political economy and historical materialism. London, political economy again. Chapter 4, 1857 to 1860, the Grundrisse and its consequences, the bibliography and outline, the Grundrisse manuscript, the plans of the Grundrisse period, the interim development of the Grundrisse manuscript. Chapter 5, 1861 to 1883, the quote, critique of political economy and capital. The third chapter in the, quote, theories of surplus value. The manuscripts that became capital. The fate of the six-book plan and of capital. Chapter 6, beyond 1883, the fate of the manuscripts for capital. Engels' editorial endeavors. The status of Engels' endeavors. Preface. Marx's written output, comprising books, articles, and manuscripts, was massive. Much of it remained unpublished in his own lifetime, and much of it was left in a state not intended for publication. There is still no complete edition of all his extant works, and no prospect of one. Each of the editions available provides only a fragmented version of the structure of Marx's bibliography. For example, the English edition of the collected works of Marx and Engels, presently being published, omits virtually all the notebook materials relating to Marx's studies of political economy during the 1844 to 45 period and 1851 to 53. Most of these writings have been published in one form or another, but these are scattered across a range of sources. Setting out to read, quote, Marx means being faced with a bewildering array of references to his lengthy and complicated bibliography, often with no guidance being given as to the chronological or substantive situation of the various works cited. In spite of all this, there exists no bibliographical analysis fully to guide students of Marx through this maze of writings. In this book, I provide a detailed analytical guide to the chronological and substantive situation of each of Marx's main critico-theoretical works. The format is as concise as the material will allow, and each phase of Marx's evolving critical theory of capitalist society is summarized in a diagram. In the course of this exposition, certain related bibliographical issues are discussed. Some of these issues are more important to Marxology than others, but all have been included in order to emphasize the limitations of the sources available for the study of Marx's thought. It is a premise of this book that in order fully to comprehend Marx's critical theory, it is necessary to trace its complex evolution, to treat his writings as an chronological whole, and to select from them pieces in order to build up an interpretation is inappropriate and potentially misleading. It is equally misguided to cut into his writings at any one chronological phase and search for the authentic reading of Marx's thought. Any serious study of Marx's critique of capitalism and political economy must, therefore, begin with an appreciation of the bibliographical framework within which his evolving ideas were manifested. I must stress that the focus of this book is Marx's bibliography. It is not intended to be a substitute for reading a reliable biography. My work is designed rather to complement and supplement such a reading. In this book, biographical details are treated only to the extent that they elucidate the bibliographical development and associated issues and provide continuity in the exposition. Moreover, this book is not a shortcut to an understanding of the method and substance of Marx's complex critical theory. My work is intended to be a preliminary guide and framework for the more detailed study of his thought per se, in the hope that greater attention will be paid to its evolution, and that consequently a deeper and more meaningful understanding of it will result. The research on which this book is based was first outlined in my bibliographical analysis of Karl Marx's writings in political economy, published in the Research Report or Occasional Papers series of the Department of Economics, University of Newcastle, Australia, in October 1977. Since then, I have expanded the work considerably in both scope and detail. The following people have encouraged and helped me in this endeavor: Bob Coates, Barry Gordon, Jeffrey Harcourt, Margaret Manal. I think she wrote the book with Maximilian Rubel, and the late Ronald Meek and Maximilian Rubel. Of course, I remain responsible for the interpretations presented herein. My thanks are due to Joan Levrench for help with some translations, and to Joan Alridge and Lorraine King for their part in preparing the typescript. I am especially grateful to my wife, Renate, for her able assistance with editing, translating, and typing. Introduction. Chapter 1. Introduction. Marx's Critico-Theoretical writings, structures, and issues. This book focuses on what will be called Marx's Critico-Theoretical writings. These encompass only part of his total bibliography, but they do contain his main contributions to intellectual history. The writings included under this rubric are those in which the analyses are the result of Marx's preoccupying intellectual activity, namely the pursuit and propagation of a critical comprehension of the nature and operations of capitalism as a social system that functions through human iniquity and depression. He sought to expose the imminent, quote, laws of capitalist evolution and its ultimate and inevitable demise by means of applying the weapon of theoretical criticism against false intellectual images of the system, most especially those perpetrated by the writers of political economy. The progressive evolution of Marx's use of the critical method may be summarized schematically as follows: 1835 to 41, study of law, history, and philosophy; 1839 to 41, critique of philosophy; 1842, critique of religion; 1842 to 3, critique of politics and society; 1843, critique of social and political philosophy; 1844 to 6, study of political economy; 1844, critique of capitalism, vide or vide political economy; 1845 to 6, critique of anti-Hegelian philosophy; 1846, formulation of the historical materialist method; 1847, critique of political economy. The stages of this progression are designated by Marx's critical object. 3 such stages can be discerned up to 1844. First, the stage of the abstract critique of philosophy and religion, which is confined to Marx's time at university and immediately afterwards. Second, his first work as a journalist in 1842 to 43 brought Marx into contact with the human issues of social, political, and economic life. These became his immediate focus in a series of important critical articles. Third, he sought a more theoretical framework for his social critique through a critical reading of the social and political philosophy of Hegel. Then, in late 1843, Marx, quote, discovered, unquote, political economy and found in it the essential anatomy and physiology of contemporary society. After reading the young Engels article titled Outlines of a Critique of Political Economy, in one way or another, political economy became the focus of Marx's critico-theoretical endeavors throughout the rest of his life. There was one apparent digression from this path in 1845 to 6, when he sought to distance himself from the contemporary trend in purely philosophical critique. This, quote, digression, though, became an integral part of the evolution of Marx's critique of political economy, in that it led him to formulate the principles of historical materialism, which subsequently provided the methodological core of his thought. Marx's first studies in political economy led him to a critical comprehension of the nature and operations of capitalism through political economy, rather than to a critique of the analyses of the system that he encountered. His first exposition of the critical theory of capitalism in 1844 emphasized the immediate human ramifications of living under the domination of capital. In 1847 and beyond, but most especially in 1857 to 8, Marx's critical object became the analyses of capitalism, in which political economists portrayed to varying degrees a false and apologetic intellectual image of the system. Through his critique of political economy, Marx endeavored during the rest of his life to formulate and propagate a critical theory of the essential nature and imminent evolution of capitalism. In tracing the bibliographic dimensions of the evolution of Marx's critical thought, a chronological periodization will be used. Before 1844, 1844 to 1856, 1857 to 1860, 1861 to 1883, beyond 1883. A chapter of the book will be devoted to each of these phases. It must be emphasized that while this chronological division is a sound rationale, as the argument in the text of the book will make clear, it is not to be taken to imply anything per se about the complex issue of the nature of the evolution of Marx's critical theory. These phases certainly do not represent periods of intellectual discontinuity. Indeed, a premise upon which the work in this study is founded is that Marx's critical theory evolved organically and dialectically, and not through any series of quantum jumps. I'm assuming that's a critique, not particularly made explicit, of Althusser with his famous, epistemological break, which I think he dates to the year 1845. Beyond the pedagogic benefits of a detailed and accessible chronological analysis of Marx's writing and critical theory, more profound issues of Marx scholarship are exposed by this analysis. The careful study of Marx's accumulating bibliography reveals evidence pertaining to several such issues. First, it is revealed that there is some difficulty and consequent confusion about the dating of Marx's first studies and writings that center on political economy. Second, the evidence available suggests that while Engels' 1843 article, titled Outlines of a Critique of Political Economy, undoubtedly acted as a catalyst in stimulating Marx's concern with political economy, it in no way defined or bounded the study that Marx undertook. Third, there arises the complicated but important issue of the dynamics of Marx's bibliography and critical theory. His plans for his complete critico-theoretical project underwent continual change as the project evolved. The complexity of these changes in scope and analytical organization is considerable and has significant implications for the interpretation of the precise nature of the methodological and substantive evolution of the critico-theoretical core of Marx's thought. Most especially do these changes involve the fate of the, quote, six-book plan, end quote, that Marx initially formulated for his complete critique of capitalism. Opinion about this fate affects profoundly the interpretation of the status and situation of capital in the critique. Fourth, an issue that is an integral part of the dynamics of the plans just referred to concerns the fate of the 1857, quote, introduction manuscript. Marx only explicitly endeavors to set down the methodology of his critical theory as it developed from the basic tenets of historical materialism. His subsequent apparent rejection of the piece complicates further the task of comprehending the implications of these bibliographical dynamics. Fifth, and again associated with the dynamics of Marx's bibliography, is the puzzle of his failure ever to complete most of what he set out to write. The evidence available suggests that this fact, and possibly much of his indecision about the scope of his critique of capitalism, stemmed from an extreme self-consciousness about the problem of presenting his work. The requirement was that it would be widely read and understood for its very raison d'etre was the formation of a uniform proletarian consciousness as a theoretical foundation for the revolutionary transcendence of capitalism. If the presentation failed to achieve this impact, then Marx's life work as the theorist of revolution failed too. As a result of considering the bibliographical evidence pertinent to these issues, several important interdependent conclusions are indicated. These affect profoundly the approach to be adopted when studying Marx's critico-theoretical writings. First, the totality. The totality of Marx's critical theory involves an evolving, methodological, and substantive structure that can only be comprehended within a chronological frame of reference. This evolution consists of elements of both continuity and change interwoven in a complex pattern. Second, achronological, non-evolutionary readings of Marx's writings are most inappropriate in the light of this dynamic complexity. Pieces from different phases in Marx's intellectual development are not able legitimately to be assembled into a holistic interpretation. Third, readings of Marx's writings that emphasize one phase of his thought to the exclusion of others must fail to comprehend fully the scope and significance of Marx's total contribution to intellectual history. Finally, the common practice of studying Marx's thought by reading Capital only is potentially misleading in two senses. One is that the work is an incomplete guide to the totality of his critical theory of capitalism. The other is that such a reading must be tempered by a full appreciation of the bibliographical, methodological, and substantive situation and status that can be ascribed to the work. This is a complex and controversial issue, but the evidence that is listed below reveals that Capital is an unfinished climax to an ambiguous critico-theoretical project of uncertain dimensions. It certainly cannot legitimately be read as a definitive or axiomatic statement of Marx's critical theory. In this assessment, it is as well to be mindful of Marx's reported reply to the young Karl Kautsky when he asked about the publication of Marx's, quote, complete works, and quote. Marx's response, so the story goes, was that they would first have to be written. They would first have to be written. This anecdote has a ring of prophetic truth when the assembled bibliographical evidence is considered. In spite of the profound significance of the bibliographic framework within which Marx's thought developed, a reading of the Marxological and Marxist literature reveals that very few writers have devoted much attention to the complex details involved. The most substantial efforts made so far in this field have been those of the French Marxologist Maximilien Rubel. The results of his research comprise many articles and books, together with collections and translations of Marx's works, all originally available only in the French language, with one or two pieces in German. English readers now have access to his book, Marx Without Myth, a chronological study of his life and work, which I have on this channel, written jointly with Marguerite Menal, that's what I was referencing earlier, published in 1975 into some of his key essays published as Rubel on Karl Marx, 5 essays in 1981. Marx Without Myth is mainly biographical, although the chronology of Marx's life includes considerations of some bibliographic details and issues. Two of the essays in the latter work are more directly bibliographical. One of these, A History of Marx's, quote, Economics, originated as the introduction to the volume of Marx's works edited by Rubel and published as Oeuvre Économique 2 in 1968. The other, titled The Plan and Method of the, quote, Economics, was originally published in the journal Études de Marxologie in October 1973. Each deals with the important issues of structure and method in Marx's thought as it evolved towards Capital. My work takes account of the insights provided by Rubel, but I treat the bibliographical structure of Marx's critico-theoretical writings in more explicit detail and raise issues not evident in those of Rubel's contributions available in English. One other substantial treatment of Marx's bibliography should be mentioned, Roman Rozdolsky's book, The Making of Marx's Capital, published in English in 1977, includes 2 chapters that deal with this topic. In these chapters, Rozdolsky provides some important analyses of the bibliographical puzzles and their substantive significance raised by a study of Marx's writings leading up to Capital. A reading of Rozdolsky's work has provided valuable guidance for the present development of my original researches, most especially with respect to the dynamics of Marx's plans for his work. Several other works that deal with Marx's bibliography more or less specifically are much less substantial and cover in brief the same grounds as those covered by Rubel and Rozdolsky. The most important of these are Salo Ryazanskaya's preface to Marx's theories of surplus value, Vitaly Vygotsky's book, The Story of a Great Discovery, How Karl Marx Wrote Capital, which I just started reading, Ben Brewster's article, Introduction to Marx's Notes on Machines, David McClellan's biography, Karl Marx's Life and Thought, and Martin Nicholas's foreword to Marx's Grundrisse, The Foundations of the Critique of Political Economy. And that's the end of the introduction, and which is also chapter 1 of The Making of Marx's Critical Theory, a Bibliographical Analysis by Alan Oakley, right? So I just want to make sure it's Alan Oakley. I don't know if I said the date either. The date is from 1983. Yes. Thank you so much for listening. Alan Oakley.